started in our conversations on CARICOM as we welcome Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, His Excellency David Comissiong. Ambassador, good morning to you.
Morning, Pearson.
There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot happening in our side of the region as well. What concerns you most?
Honestly, what concerns me most is the militarization of our region, the buildup of U.S. Military assets in the region, and the demands that the United States is putting on governments across CARICOM to locate their military assets in our territory, because it suggests a full-scale reversion to the Monroe Doctrine, which is that doctrine that the U.S. promulgated in 1823, basically saying that this region is their backyard, and basically that they are at liberty to do as they will, not really recognizing the sovereignty of our country. So that is a very, very troubling development. Of course, we also have the hurricane, you know. So one crisis in the Southern Caribbean, and simultaneously another crisis of a different nature in the Northern Caribbean. So it's pressure. Yeah,
and somehow Barbados caught in the middle somehow.
Yes.
But Barbados has a position on all of these things. As a matter of fact, last weekend in the Barbados Labour Party's conference, Prime Minister Motley took time to speak to those issues that you just mentioned. And I want to share a little bit of that, and then we can talk about it right after. Let's take a look at Prime Minister Mia Amal Motley in her presentation at the last General Conference.
We will continue to champion democracy, human rights, and the rule of law internationally, Kerry, because we have seen how fragile countries can be and how easy it is to dissipate. Our voices in international fora will always stand on principle, whether it is speaking up for the sovereignty of small nations or calling for countries like Cuba to be protected and to be brought back into the international community by removing embargoes or calling out global inequities. If ever we needed a reminder of how unstable and how dangerous this world that we live in is, and how vulnerable our Caribbean region is, it is now with us, facing a multiplicity of threats. We don't need to look any further than the menacing vessels, military vessels, from the United States across the Caribbean Sea, including what is reputed to be the world's largest warship. These are not times of pirates anymore. This is 2025, and we have cause to be duly concerned, because even as that is happening, one of the most dangerous hurricanes for the 2025 Atlantic season is bearing down on our brothers and sisters in the Northern Caribbean. Melissa, we are facing, my friends, an extremely dangerous and untenable situation in Southern Caribbean. And as a people with a tragic history of being subjected to centuries of big power, orchestrated genocide, terrorism, and warfare, and as a small state, we have invested tremendous time and energy and effort in establishing and maintaining our region as a zone of peace. Peace is critical to all that we do in this region. And now that peace is being threatened, we have to speak up. I want to thank the former prime ministers of the community, the very strong statement issued by them for the fundamental principle that was agreed upon on the formation of the Caribbean community by the Honorable Dr. Eric Williams. I want to thank them because without their statement, we are possibly going to have others think that those who now lead governments are speaking in vain without reflecting on the fact that this has been a core principle of the Caribbean community from its very inception. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Prime Ministers.
It is Barbados Prime Minister Mia Amal Motley addressing the General Conference last weekend about this space we occupy known as a zone of peace. And she's thanking predecessors, Prime Ministers Eric Williams and more. Let's talk a little bit more about what those Prime Ministers said and how we have not yet deviated from those positions.
Yes, that, that was a very, very important statement by Prime Minister Motley, because what she did very effectively there was rally our entire community to fight for something that is so valuable and critical for us, the concept of us being a zone of peace. And she's making the point that it goes right back to us, the very start of our coming together as a community CARICOM in 1972. And you know, why did we need the zone of peace from back then? Well, for two reasons. Number one, since that Monroe Doctrine of 1823, this entire region has had to reckon with the big power of the United States, which is the big superpower of this region, the regional hegemon, and it's the threat that it poses to the sovereignty of small nations that live in live in the same neighborhood. Then, secondly, there was the intrusion of the Cold War. That contest between the United States, the Soviet Union, forces of capitalism, forces of socialism, and the fact that that contestation was brought into our region. So in 1972, when we were newly independent nations, and we said, our leaders, Prime Minister Barrow, Michael Manley, Prime Minister Forbes Burnham, Dr. Eric Williams, in 1972, when we were coming together to form CARICOM, we said, look, one of the first things we are going to do, we are going to declare our independence and sovereignty by recognizing Cuba. That was a declaration of our, in a sense, of our zone of peace, because we were saying to the United States, no, we are not, you can't impose your policy on us. We are independent, sovereign nations. We insist that our sovereignty be respected, and this is our sovereign, independent decision, despite what you say. And that should be seen within the context of something that happened a decade before that, when even earlier, if we go back to the Federation, the West Indies Federation of 1958 to 1962, one of the big issues that we grappled with then was our leaders of the Federation, you know, the Federation, the headquarters of the Federation was in Trinidad, and then they had to determine where should we locate the capital in Trinidad. And our leaders chose Chaguaramas. But Chaguaramas had been gifted by the British colonial power to the United States to set up a military base in 1941 during the Second World War. So then we had a big tussle with the US, because we said, look, we don't want any military base. We want you to give us back the base so that we could establish our federal capital at Chaguaramas. And so that was a big issue back then. And what emerged from that tussle back then with the US was this notion that we do not want military bases or assets or installations in our territory. And all of that then came together in the late 1970s in the idea that our region must be a zone of peace and must be respected as a zone of peace. And, you know, this is actually an international law concept, because we were acting upon a resolution passed by the United Nations in 1978. The United Nations had a special session in 1978 where they were discussing disarmament. They were discussing all this militarization and the need for these big powers to disarm. And they passed this resolution which said, it called for and authorized, and I'm going to quote now, the establishment of zones of peace in various regions of the world under appropriate conditions to be clearly defined and determined freely by the states concerned in the zone, taking into account the characteristics of the zone and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations and in conformity with international law. So the UN said, look, every region, you have the right and the power to declare yourself a zone of peace and to determine what will be the characteristics of that zone of peace. And to our credit, the Caribbean acted upon this immediately. By the next year, 1979, Grenada co-sponsored a resolution at the Organization of American States declaring our region a zone of peace. And the resolution passed, and the operative part of the resolution, part of it said, to express its deep concern over the heightening of tension in the Caribbean sub-region resulting from the recent increases in military activity in the Caribbean area, to repudiate the concept of the region or any of its sub-regions as a sphere or influence for any power. In other words, we are nobody's backyard. To stress its support for the principles of ideological pluralism and peaceful coexistence, which are essential to the peace, stability, and development of the region. So that's 1979. And then following upon that, we continue to build out this concept of the zone of peace. In fact, even our statesmen began to add more content to it. For example, our Prime Minister Errol Barrow in 1986, and I'm going to quote him very quickly. He was speaking to the CARICOM heads of government, and this is what he said in July 1986. My position remains clear that the Caribbean must be recognized and respected as a zone of peace. I have said, and I repeat, that while I am Prime Minister of Barbados, our territory will not be used to intimidate any of our neighbors, be that neighbor Cuba or the United States of America. And I do not believe that size is necessarily the only criterion for determining these matters. In other words, it doesn't matter how small you are. It is important to let people know where you stand in what is a moral commitment to peace in our region. And then I would say the whole thing, the whole concept then was really fully consolidated in January of 2014, when the CARICOM countries, as part of the wider Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, CELAC, at the CELAC conference in Cuba, all of them, so this is the entire hemisphere with the exception of the US and Canada, they passed the proclamation, the Declaration of Havana, constituting the entire Latin American and Caribbean region a zone of peace. And incidentally, the person who headed the delegation, the Trinidad and Tobago delegation to that conference, that crafted that proclamation of the region being a zone of peace, was the current Prime Minister, Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bissessar. So this concept that we are a zone of peace is very well established. It's nothing to do with crime, domestic crime. It is all about contestation between nations, making the point that this region is nobody's backyard, is nobody's sphere of influence. It is not to be the theater for warfare, for militarism. It is to be a region in which national sovereignty is respected, and in which we have a modus operandi of always settling disputes peacefully, not by militarism and war.
There's a lot happening on CARICOM, a lot that threatens our peace and sovereignty and security as well. We just heard about the building up of military assets by the United States in parts of the region and the pressure they're putting on, even on Grenada to also be a part of that particular militarization. But then we're also threatened by so much else. Climate is one of them, and we would have had just massive militia impacting severely some of our members to the north of us. And so, Ambassador, the relief effort continues. We do know that Barbados has mobilized in a significant way with its partners, relief to Jamaica in particular, but then, and Cuba and Haiti. So let's talk a little bit about the ongoing need and what we can still do.
Well, Pearson, the link between the two issues is that the really critical issues that we should really be focused on in a laser-like manner is the climate crisis, the humanitarian crisis that has been generated by such a powerful hurricane like Melissa, rather than having to have our attention diverted with this crisis of militarism that we could do without, you know, that is not necessary, and we could really do without, so that we could focus on the plight of our people coming out of Hurricane Melissa. So you're quite right. Severe damage was done to Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, much lesser damage to the Dominican Republic, Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. But yes, I think the three that we really need to focus on are Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti. Now, fortunately, Jamaica and Haiti, as CARICOM states, are members of CDEMA, our Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And therefore, they have been they've been able to benefit from CDEMA's program. And one of the great things that CDEMA has done, and we did it just in the nick of time, CDEMA established this emergency hub here in Barbados, close to the Grantley Adams Airport, this massive, massive warehouse, where over the last 12 months, we have stocked it with all kinds of humanitarian relief supplies. So as soon as Melissa hit, we were able to ship off critical items that we already had in stock, and send to, especially to Jamaica. But I believe Haiti would by now have benefited from some of that as well. Cuba, however, not being a CARICOM country, is outside of the CDEMA system, so they have not benefited from this. So the Barbados government, in addition to what CDEMA is doing, you know, what CARICOM is doing, the Barbados government has its own initiative, and the GIS has put out information about how Barbadians can make financial donations to all three countries, Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba. And I shared that information, so I think it maybe at some point it will come up on the screen. But yes, Barbadians, you can go to your bank. A special account has been set up at the central bank, but your bank, once you give them the information.
We're putting details on your screen. Take a look, everyone.
Yes, and you could determine which country you want your donation to go to. So you just indicate to your bank which of the three countries you would like your donation to go to. But in addition to financial donations, since Cuba will not benefit from the CDEMA warehouse and the goods that have been collected at the CDEMA warehouse, we are going to do a special effort for Cuba. And so from tomorrow, there's going to be a collection point at the Israel Lovell Foundation in My Lord's Hill, St. Michael, for physical supplies for Cuba. And the Cuban government has said that the priority is on food items, dry goods, and especially powdered milk. Powdered milk is what they need most of all, so I guess baby formula, but other forms of powdered milk that could be used by adults as well. They're also asking for grains, wheat flour, rice, for example, and also tin goods. But they did emphasize that the biggest priority really is powdered milk. So we encourage Barbadians who would like to assist Cuba. And you know, Cuba did not have any big loss of life because Cuba is a very well organized society, and they have worked out, like down to a T, how to protect their people from hurricanes. So you know, they have evacuation programs and so forth. So some reports say there were no casualties in Cuba. Some say there were 2. But there's been no real loss of life or substantial loss of life. However, lots of property damage, much flooding, lots of property damage. So, and so they moved hundreds of thousands of people. They evacuated, and we know that's why we need the food supplies now to assist with those. That large number of evacuees. So all 3 are in need, and we would encourage Barbadians to be as generous as possible in giving to all 3 countries.
And so for tomorrow's, that's the drive that starts tomorrow, really. Remember, you're depositing at the Israel Level Foundation.
Oh yes, and I should say the hours are from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Any day of the week except Sunday.
Right.
So, and well, we're not sure how long that drive will go on for, but as of now, 10 a.m., 4 p.m., Israel Level Foundation, all days of the week except Sunday.
And so, Barbadians, we can do this together. After all, we are all brothers and sisters in this space in the region. If you want to make a cash monetary donation, we can again share the information on the screen about where you and how you can do so. Note the account numbers as well. Of course, you can go through the central bank if you have any further questions about this and you need clarity on how to do this. You can make contact with the Central Bank of Barbados. But note the account numbers, and as you do so, make your monetary donations, because money also will help to assist the recovery effort in Cuba, Jamaica, and Haiti as well. Ambassador, we have to leave it there.
Yes, and I mean, if folks have not been able to pick up that financial information, feel free to contact me at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I can get it to folks.
Thank you. It's right there on your screen again, folks. Take a look one more time and note it. Look back at the show when you possibly can. And you can contact Ambassador David Comissiong at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Note that information. And I know Barbadians, we know how to help. So we want you to help as well. Remember, you can make donations specifically for the relief in Cuba at the Israel Level Foundation, 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, each day except Sundays, starting tomorrow. They're looking specifically for powdered milk, as well as the other things that you know for life and sustenance in the land. I encourage you, and I thank you already for being generous in your donations as well. Ambassador, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pearson.
You're
much
welcome.
appreciated.
That's been today's Conversations on CARICOM.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning.